This slideshow presentation is focused on the resume, the first step toward getting a job. Many job seekers might ask, so what is a resume? A resume is a document that is often your first contact that you have with an employer. Therefore, it's a very important business document, and it's one you want to take very seriously in the job search process. A resume is also a document that's intended to help get you to the interview step of the process. It does this by outlining your skills, your abilities, your work experiences, and your education, and everything you include in your resume is intended to help employers begin to see you as a good fit for their company, as a good fit for this open position. I think it's important at this time that we make a distinction as to what a resume does not do. And first and foremost among that is that the resume itself does not get you the job. The resume is just the first step in the process. Additionally, the resume does not include irrelevant information. Only information that is relevant to showing that you're qualified for a position, to showing that you're a good fit, should be included. And finally, a resume is not something that always stays the same. It's a living document that must grow as you do. Likewise, it should be adapted for any position to which you apply. There is no one-size-fits-all with your resume, and certainly while that means more work, it's also the right thing to do if you're trying to get a job. So now you might find yourself saying, well, what does go on my resume? There's a range of information that you should include in your resume that is relevant to the job and which can help to show that you're qualified. First and foremost, you have to show contact information. Employers have to be able to find you if they're interested in calling you for an interview. So your home address, your phone number, your email, all those important elements of contact information must be there. Likewise, in most cases you have to show your education and training, and you have to show it in such a way that demonstrates you're qualified for the position. Third, you should always include work history. Generally, we tell people to include the last 3 jobs or the last 7 to 10 years at the minimum. You should include specific skills that help to qualify you for the job. In particular, if a job is asking for a specific kind of skill, you want to find a way to make sure that you're highlighting that in some part of your resume. And then finally, you want to make sure that you're getting other elements in there that can show that you're a very qualified individual, someone who maybe goes above and beyond. So things like accomplishments, certifications, volunteerism, anything else that can show you in a positive light should be something you should consider putting on your resume. There are also many elements that you should exclude from your resume. First and foremost among those is personal information. Outside of your contact information, there is no room or need for any personal information on a resume. Additionally, it's not a good idea to include your photo. Many employers look at this in such a way as a dangerous element for them because it could lead to discriminatory practices. Unless you're going for a job in an artistic or graphic design field, you generally should shy away from fancy designs or use of a lot of color. Likewise today, because most resumes are sent electronically, in most cases you don't need to really take into account the type of paper you're going to use. However, I will say that if you're going to be going to an interview or somewhere where you're handing out resumes, there's still something to be said for using a nice quality paper when you do have a situation like that. Your resume should not include any mention of high school. Even if you're a recent high school graduate, in most cases, employers don't really care a whole lot about your high school experience. You should not include your salary or salary history. In most cases, if they're going to ask for information relating to your salary expectations or history, that's going to be something you include in a cover letter. And finally, you should also avoid the mention of references upon your resume. There really isn't room for that, and to say that references are available upon request is kind of something that goes without saying. There are a few other elements that probably should not be on a resume. First and most amongst those is the idea of a job objective or a profile that maybe is similar to a job objective. I know that in the past it was very popular to put job objectives on resumes, but today they're kind of considered antiquated because in most cases you're applying for a job, a very specific job, through an online application process. So to put a job objective on there is sort of wasted space. You're going to be clearly stating what you're applying for in your cover letter and in your materials that you send with your resume. So to have a job objective, not really necessary anymore. And likewise, because of that, they can be very limiting. You should also avoid the use of subjective descriptions in your resume, things like great leadership skills or creative innovator. And instead of having sort of these vague general terms that are subjective in nature, Stick to things that you can back up with examples or numbers or anything you can clarify a little more concretely. So stick to the facts, be objective, focus on these types of accomplishments that you can back up. So, how do you go about writing a resume then? Well, there are 4 steps that we're going to be talking about in the following slides that really comprise the key to writing your resume. First, you'll need to know your market. Second, you'll need to know your product. Third, you'll put together your resume and assemble it. And fourth, you'll spend time critiquing it, evaluating it, editing it, making sure it's of high quality. The first step in writing a resume will be to know your market. Just as you would for any other journey, you'll need to decide where you want to go. And in the case of a resume, what exactly are you hoping to accomplish? What career field? What type of position? Or better yet, what specific job posting are you aiming for? Knowing this is going to help you to write a very targeted and specific resume that's going to lead to much greater chances of success. To successfully know your market, you have to know what the employer is looking for, and there are many ways you can go about doing that. First of all, you need to research the employer. Know sort of what makes that employer tick and what they do, what they're known for, what their niche is, because then you can talk about your strengths and abilities to give them exactly what they need. Make sure you research the career field for which you're applying. Know everything that's expected of someone in that field. And finally, identify the keywords in job ads. As we'll talk about more later in this presentation, keywords are very important in a resume because some employers today use applicant tracking system software, which actually tracks the keywords to see how good of a match a resume or a person is for a position. Once you know your market, and specifically what the employer is looking for in the job posting, then it's time to think about your product, which obviously in this case is you. So it's time to focus then on what your relevant transferable skills might be, the accomplishments you've had in previous work experiences, and the strengths that you're able to bring to the other organization. Ideally, you're trying to articulate these things through your resume, and that's really what the focus is in this point of the resume development. Transferable skills are a really important part of resume development and can be very beneficial when you're trying to get into a new field or a new type of position. Transferable skills are basically skills that are applicable to any job you're applying for, and they're skills that you bring with you from previous work experiences, even those that are unrelated. So things like your communication skills, your research and planning skills, your ability to work as a member of a team, your organization, and even your management and leadership skills are all things that are considered to be transferable. It's very important in knowing your product that you're able to articulate how your strengths and accomplishments have been beneficial in the past, and to sort of imply how they can be beneficial for this new employer. So what did you accomplish in your previous work experiences that you can highlight? What were some strengths that you, so to speak, bring to the table that obviously will be transferable into this new position? How did you help your former employers? How did your actions benefit their company? Because that's going to give your new and prospective employer a better idea of how you can be a benefit to them. Once you know your market and what they're looking for, and you've done your homework about yourself and are able to match yourself up as a product for that organization, then it's time to start assembling your resume and putting together a resume that articulates how you're a good fit. Some important elements to remember as you craft your resume. First of all, remember that you want to stay focused on what the needs of the company are. That can sound cold at times, but ultimately a company is worried about filling its needs, not necessarily filling your needs. So focus on their needs and what you can do to help them. Focus on your accomplishments. Think about how your accomplishments speak to the kind of employee you are and the kind of employee that you can be. Remember to take into account keywords from the job description. Remember I mentioned earlier that many companies today, particularly larger companies, are using applicant tracking software systems, or ATS systems they're sometimes called. These systems will scan your resume, look for keywords, and then essentially spit out the resumes and the candidates that seem to be the best match based on a keyword scan. So it's really important that you match up your resume to those keywords. And then finally, you want to think about your appearance. What does the appearance of the resume look like? Is it easy to read? Is it something that looks like a paragraph or an essay? Or is it something that looks a little more organized and clean cut than that? The resumes that follow, I think, will help you get a better idea of how to do that. One of the biggest questions job seekers have as they start to put their resume together is, how do I format this information? How do I put it together? What order does it go in? And my answer to that is always, well, there's no set order. Resume format and the order in which you put it in is very circumstantial based upon your life and work experiences. So it's your job as a job seeker to adapt the format and the style and the order of the information to fit your level of experience, your education, your personal circumstances. So the resume style should fit the job for which you're applying, and the way you put it together, it should match up with the types of experiences and the type of qualifications that you have. As you develop your resume, there are two general formats that many people like to use. The most popular is probably the chronological format, in which elements of your resume are ordered by time. The second format is called a functional, and in the functional format, the resume is ordered by function, by skills, by experiences, and tries to highlight those things. In my experience, many successful resumes combine a bit of both, and while I'll talk about each and its benefits, I do think that a combination of these two tends to make the best type of resume. The first of these organizational formats is the chronological format, and to talk about that in a little more detail, basically, as you will recall, the chronological format is very much focused on the time orientation. So this type of resume is going to be very big on dates. Typically, it's going to focus on the work experience section, and it's going to be something that's very beneficial for someone who has a lot of work experience to use a solely chronological resume. HR professionals favor this type of resume because it does give dates, because it shows your most recent work experience, and then works backwards, reverse chronologically, from your most recent work experience back through your oldest work experience. And it's going to be very detailed about including the dates where you started and ended someplace, the positions that you had at each company, and HR professionals like the fact that it shows your transition from one position to another, your growth, and your transitions throughout your career. A fully functional resume, on the other hand, often does not include very many dates. Instead, it's going to be organized by the types of skills that you have and how those skills might be beneficial for the positions for which you're applying. Now, one of the drawbacks of a functional resume is that sometimes in the past, job seekers who had big gaps in their employment perhaps were using functional format resumes to hide those gaps, and HR professionals have caught on to this. So the red flag that's raised sometimes with a fully functional resume is, why is this person not telling me about all the times and dates where he or she worked? And there's often that question mark that's implied. As a result of the stigma that's attached to the fully functional resume and the limitation of the chronological resume to allow you to fully demonstrate your skills and abilities, it's best to use a combination format resume. I would encourage you in doing so to find a way that's going to demonstrate both your skills and your accomplishments, as well as be transparent about your work history, because that way you're giving HR professionals everything that they want to see in a resume. And I think the bottom line is that the layout you choose is one that's going to work for your situation and is going to help you sell yourself as a good candidate for the job. This resume is a good example of a combination resume. The individual who has created it began with the section that highlights his key skills for the position. Then he goes into his work experience and his education sections. And both of those sections will be organized chronologically, so it kind of has the best of both worlds. I also wanted to point out on this resume a couple elements that are important in any resume development. And first of all is the idea of consistency. If you look at the section headers here, every section header has consistency in its bold-faced font, its use of all capital letters, and the fact that it has lines above and below it. So whatever you choose to do for one section header, you should be doing for all section headers. Likewise, if you look a little more closely at the resume, you would see that there's consistency even when the companies are listed where the person has worked in the work experience section. If one company is bold-faced with the dates beside it and the position below it italicized, then the second company should be done exactly the same way. And even when you go into the education section, there should be some consistency and similarity. Consistency makes things easier to read and clearer to follow, so it's really important that you maintain consistency. And directly related to that is the idea that even with font, you should stay consistent throughout the course of the resume. The second point here in yellow that I wanted to point out is remember that you're not writing in complete sentences, so therefore using strong action verbs to begin some of your bullet points can be really helpful, and it's a way to say things powerfully, energetically, without having to have a great deal of writing. This second sample resume is also a combination resume, however it differs a little bit in that the education section precedes the work experience section in this resume. You might remember in the previous sample resume that the work experience section was second and preceded the education. And that was because in that situation the gentleman who created that resume had a lot of work experience in the field for which he was applying. Therefore his education wasn't quite as vital. What I want to point out to all of you is that your resume should flow from the most relevant, most important information to the least relevant information. And I often use the idea of the inverted pyramid that journalists have to use. You know, they're supposed to use their most important stories and information in the very beginning of the article and then work towards their least relevant. The same thing holds true for a job seeker, because you only have so much time to get the attention of the individuals looking at your resume. They're looking at many resumes for each job opening, so therefore you want to show them right up front why you're a good fit, why you're a possible candidate. As I said, this resume was for a student who was new to the medical field, so she put her training and education first because that was more relevant than her previous work experience. Make sure you're doing the same thing as you develop and organize your resume. I thought it was important to demonstrate that I practice what I preach in my own resume, so I've included that, and we'll take a few moments to look at that as well. As you can see here from the first page of my resume, that I'm demonstrating some of the skills that I possess that I knew the job listing was calling for, that the position entails. So I've broken it down into some sections where I have accomplishments and skills relevant to what they're looking for in that position. So I have a section relating to professional outreach, customer service, and communication skills, and another skills section that's related to organization and event planning. These were two important areas for the job for which I would be applying, and I was trying to highlight and articulate my abilities in those areas. The second page of my resume then would be my work experience and my education, and I think it's important to note that my work experience would come second in this case before the education, simply because I had previous work experience in a related field. I think it's important to note that I used a reverse chronological listing of my work experience and my education. Again, that's in line with the chronological piece of resume formatting. And I also think it's important to point out that my work experiences are not very detailed because I've already extracted most of the relevant information and put that in the skills sections to show how I'm qualified. So I didn't want to be redundant. I wanted to make this simple and easy to read, yet give a sense of where I've come from and what I've done. A quick note about page length. In most cases, for many of our students, I'm typically advocating maybe a page to a page and a half, maybe 2 pages, depending upon how much work experience you've had. But in very few cases should you be going beyond 2 pages for your resume. The question I often get from job seekers when they're starting to finish their resume and they're about ready to send them out to employers is, what format should I use to send my resume to employers? And I always answer them with this: it depends on the situation. The first step is always going to be that you need to read the job description very carefully. What exactly are employers telling you to do? If they're asking you to send an email and attach your resume, then that's exactly how you need to do it. If they're telling you need to apply online and upload your resume as part of that application, that's what you're going to need to do as well. Read the directions carefully to find out what options you have for attaching your resume to your email or upload. Typically they'll allow you to use a Word or a PDF in many cases. If you have both options, I will say that there are some benefits to the PDF document, simply because the PDF document is essentially a snapshot or like a picture of your resume, and it opens up the same for every person. It cannot be edited, whereas if somebody else has a slightly different settings for their computer and their Word documents, I always worry that your resume could open up differently, and all your hard work to format it, to get it all perfect, some of that could go awry if their settings are slightly different than yours. So I've always kind of favored the PDF for that reason. In addition to having your resume in a Word and PDF format, it also would probably be a good idea to consider creating what's called an e-resume, or a text-only resume. A text-only resume is a resume that essentially is a resume without formatting. Basically, it's going to be just the text, and it makes it easier to cut and paste a resume and to paste it into those text boxes that you're sometimes asked to copy and paste into when you're applying for jobs online. To do this, basically what you will need to do is you would go into Save As for your file, and instead of saving it as a Word or a PDF document, save it as a plain text document. Then you will need to go back in, open it up, and clean up the content, left justify everything, make it look neat. It's going to save you a lot of time when you have the opportunity or you're required to cut and paste your resume, because if you try to do it from a Word document or even a PDF document, all the formatting in there is going to mess everything up and it's going to be much more difficult. So this can save you some time and make life a little easier when you're asked to cut and paste an e-resume or a text-only resume. This slide shows a sample e-resume, and one thing that I want you to notice is that everything is left justified. Notice that there's really no formatting. Instead, what you need to do is, for maybe section headings, you can use all capital letters. There are no bullet points, but you can use hyphens, or they do have little asterisks or stars that you can use. You're going to definitely need to use spaces between different sections, because otherwise everything will run together and be much more difficult to read. So the e-resume is just another tool to have in your toolbox, and it's something that can save you a lot of time when you're asked to cut and paste into a job application. To develop your resume, the fourth and final step will be to critique and evaluate it, to polish it, proofread it, and make sure it's perfect and ready to send to employers. Remember, only one mistake is needed to send your resume to the circular file. So that just about wraps up everything for resume development, but there are a few reminders I want to give to you before I go. So please keep these points in mind as you critique and review your resume. Number one, remember that your resume must be perfect. There is no room for error, particularly not in a time when employers are getting dozens, sometimes hundreds of resumes for every opening. For that same reason, the resume must be very easy and quick to read. Employers should be able to find information and see that it's relevant very, very easily. Third, the resume must sell you for the position. You need to show the employer that you are qualified for the position. And finally, remember that you're tailoring that resume to the position. Unfortunately, we don't live in a one-size-fits-all, and you need to make a resume that fits for each job you're applying for. It's more work, but it's a greater chance of success in the long run. Follow all these things that we've talked about throughout the course of these slides, and I think you're going to find a lot more success in developing a resume that can really work for you and can be the first step in helping you get that job.